What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of Sit Down Saturday. And today we're going to return with the past, present, and future. We haven't done a past, present, and future sometime. And we're going to do one on TFC toys because it has a long legacy and they've kind of drifted into a place of somewhat irrelevancy. So I think it's a good time to kind of encapsulate their career. Well, not to say that they're dead, because they're definitely not. We just looked at the Tyrant here recently and they still have an Abominus yet to finish. But kind of them in their heyday, that's not the same space that they're in anymore, right? I think we'd all have to agree on that. Couple housekeeping things. One, Unicron is up for pre-orders still. You have 1 week left till Friday to get in a Sherpa or woven blanket pre-order. He will not be offered on a blanket to order online again. So 1 more week, it closes 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Friday. All you have to do to order is contact me at bobbyskullface@gmail.com. My email is in the description. Other housekeeping stuff that needs to kind of get done. The sniper rifle that was on loan to me from Lance, shout out to Lance. There was a couple things. One person kind of made it seem like I didn't take responsibility for the break. I said I broke it. I mean, I don't know how else to say it. Secondly, I saw other people saying that their materials are awful. I didn't find their materials to be all that bad. It's a design flaw in my opinion. You can just get too much leverage at that part and it's not meant for like a really clean clearance. It's my fault. I broke it. But the way it moves could have probably been designed a little bit better to give you a little bit of a safety measure there before it snapped. I was going to talk about something about the dummies real quick that somebody said don't depend on anybody else to be happy. I don't think anybody on there was saying depend on anybody else to be happy. I think what the community offers is something that you may not be aware of. It may give you something you didn't know you would appreciate. You didn't know that you would value. Not that you can't be happy without it. I don't know. That one sat funny with me. If you want to be alone and lonely and not meet people with like interests and make connections and bonds and all that kind of stuff, then, dust those Cheeto crumbs off your sweatshirt and enjoy the basement. And there's nothing wrong with that either. And there's also nothing wrong with just having a network of people and community outside, like your family, your friends you could grow up with, or your coworkers or what have you. It's just there is a lot to gain and appreciate, just like life experience-wise, of knowing other people. It's like going to a buffet. Like, you're not going to try the French toast. You paid for the buffet. You can try the French toast. If it's not for you, it's not for you. Discard it. But don't go through life never having tried the French toast. I don't know. Seems strange to me. And shout out to everybody who gave Patty a lot of love last week. All right, so let's move on to TFC. So TFC has a rich history, and we're going to go through it, of course, because we go through the past, present, and future, right? There is one thing I want to say that I heard rumor-wise. Take it with a grain of salt. I don't know it to be true, but it is my understanding that TFC is a branch of a major toy company over in China. That their TFC kind of division is only a portion of what they do, and a small portion, to be fair. That they are connected to a company over there that would be similar to the Hasbro or Mattel over here. Like a big player. And this is just sort of a side project of stuff they do. I don't know that to be true, but that's been my understanding. I've also heard about them having links to a major distributor as well, an Eastern distributor, but I don't know enough about that to put that name out there. But if you look a little bit into it and you look at how TFC's Hercules was distributed versus Make Toys Giant, if there's any evidence of that left out there, you can kind of start connecting the dots a little bit. If it's true, which I want to reiterate, I do not know. So in order to know where we're going, we have to look at where we've been and what's kind of going on now, right? So let's start at the beginning, which I think is 2008, very beginning of third party, and we'll go up into the modern era. One thing I want to mention before we get into this stuff is that I do have done these a time or two, and there's always people that want to tell me all the things that I missed. This is not supposed to cover every single release. It's supposed to cover most of the releases so that you can see a trajectory. There's tons of repaints and stuff that I've left out purposely. There may be a few releases that I've missed, but nothing that will really hold up the conversation, which is the real point of this video. This is not a Wikipedia release schedule for them. This is a conversation about the history of the company, where they've been, where they are, and where they're headed. But in order to start, we got to go back through time. So this story starts out the way a lot of third-party companies started out during this time, which was with an upgrade kit. It's funny because if to look at it and think about it now, a lot of these companies paved the way for a lot of these newer companies to come out with the full-blown figures, where that really wasn't a thing back in 2007 when this story starts, with a Prime Blade accessory for the Leader Class movie Prime, creating the scene where he decapitates Bone Crusher. Now, this is actually not the right blade pictured here, but I had a hard time even finding a picture of it. Very early third-party stuff. There was also a blue repaint of it as well. 2008, we get Battle Roller, a transforming version of the character roller compatible with multiple official primes, one of the very first ever third-party figures to hit a standard similar to official, once again at the time, keeping its contemporaries in mind for 2008. They also continued with their upgrade sets, doing a coronation set for Starscream, but also this Gear of War accessory set for various classics/universe toys, your typical Chug line, such as launchers for Mirage and Sideswipe, and a cloaking field box for Mirage. They started dabbling more in figures, this time with Target Master accessories pretty much, but the Hot Flame versus Screamer, a 2-pack of Target Masters that were supposed to resemble Hot Rod and Starscream. And this is all 2010. I didn't even come into this stuff until 2014, so this is super early third-party stuff. In 2011, we saw another set of Target Masters, the Optimax versus Megashoton. I'm not 100% sure. But once again, another Target Master set, which is kind of an accessory pack and also kind of original figures, right? And then we get the first notable TFC release, a historic third-party release that still comes up in conversation, and that was their Hercules set. 6 Constructicons, released over 2 years, I believe, 2011 and 2012. Started also one of the first third-party wars, which was between this and the Make Toys Giant. And I remember buying this set on eBay for, I think, $430 at the time, which was, I mean, I had put away a lot of money in order to make that purchase. And I remember when they showed up, and they showed up in vehicle mode without the boxes, and I remember lining up the vehicles and like on my counter, my kitchen counter, and hearing the din 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 in my head. It was a historic release, a very impressive looking Devastator, specifically for its time. Still gets brought up in conversation. Wasn't without issues. There were stability issues, mainly in the hips, which is a story that plagues this company for years to come, but it needs to be spoken about with respect, regardless of its issues, because of just how historic it was. It was like a shot heard around the world. Many people use it as their Devastators for their Masterpiece line. Many people still have it for nostalgia, which is kind of weird to think about, being 30 years old and coming across a product that creates nostalgia 15, 20 years later. Very, very, very impressive. But what was next was not quite as impressive, but interesting, and that was their primers, their Chibi Optimus Prime. I never messed with it, but it's something they put out. And they weren't done putting out kind of bizarre things. They put out a Photron, which I remember at the time thinking to myself, the Constructicons look so similar to the source material, why would they stray so far with this reflector? And, you know, hindsight being 2020 and a little bit of age and growth, I can see now that they were really going for the camera, right? They were trying to make a very realistic looking camera that transformed into 3 bots. So now I actually appreciate it a lot more than I did at that time. But it had an impact as well. But it was just so far from the source material that I, for instance, went with a Legend scale reflector option just because it looked more accurate. They also released their Iron Army set, which I believe were supposed to be used in concert with some Hasbro releases, possibly Power Core Combiner stuff. I'm not 100% sure. This was never my bag, and I certainly wasn't into or had any knowledge of the main line at that point. But what I do remember is when they announced their Superion set. I remember them showing the combine mode at first, I believe, and I went all in on this. The bots were a far cry kind of from the source material, but the combine mode kind of looked like a stylized version of Superion, especially for its time. It was known for having hip issues. The hips had a really hard time supporting the weight of the figure, and he often would do the splits on you. And sometimes the TFC materials didn't always lend themselves for the more finicky pieces like the wings, but it was the only Superion option for quite some time. They also released an upgrade kit for this, the Wings of Uranus, which they had released an upgrade kit for the Devastator as well. This was mainly to give it a more G1 look, so it had the chest plate, the more accurate Superion gun, and the Devastator had like the whole treads on the shoulders and stuff like that. Just little odds and ends. And what's crazy is, while they were releasing their aerial bots, they started releasing their Predacons, which was their next set, titled Ares, the God of War. This came out at a point when the game was kind of saturated with Predacon options. MMC was doing a set, Unique Toys was doing a set, and this set ended up kind of going by the wayside. I can't even remember if I looked. I think I did. I think I looked at Joe's set. Joe had a set of these. But it was true to form, and for the first time, it started to become a little bit more stable and very much kept their same sort of aesthetic. We also got a Gear of War upgrade set with some more guns and stuff along the way. But at this point, they had kind of grown far beyond your kind of upgrade set. They had really outgrown this game, and at this point, it wasn't even really interesting anymore. Upgrades, that is. Which brings us to our next full figure from them, which was Six Gun, which is technically a Gear of War upgrade piece as well, and was supposed to work in concert with your Hasbro Metroplex. At the time this came out, Before and After also offered a version, which I think aesthetically was more pleasing to a lot of people. The proportions on this were always kind of wonky, but this was definitely a part of the time and the history of this company. But this company's mainly known for combiners, right? And out came the next set of combiners, lickety split, their Predictabot set. And to this day, it was one of their most stable combiners, in my opinion. One of their best. If I were to create a top 3 list, it would be one of their best, either 1 or 2. It worked pretty well as a combiner. And when I say that, I mean in comparison to the other releases that they put out, which some fared better than others. But the thing about this is there's not a whole lot of growth here, aside from a little bit of extra stability. But by 2015, when this stuff is coming out, the third-party game is drastically changing. And we're getting combiners that are far more stable and far more elegant than these big clunky ones that have a tendency to slip apart. But this was a big, beefy, thick Defensor, and still looks pretty impressive to me. Now, right behind that, they did a couple sets of like KO-ish Predictabot styled things that have some sort of history that I don't know much about, but this ties into their proper toy company that I don't know a lot about. I reviewed it. It was awful. I returned it to TF Source at the time, which, to be fair, graciously took it back and gave me my money, but this was awful. One of the worst things I've looked at in my entire review experience. Now, what were we talking about? The game changing, right? So we're entering 2015, 2016. Coming up on the height of third party, in my opinion, the golden era, dominated by Masterpiece. So TFC threw their hat in the game as well and gave us an offering of Ironhide and Ratchet. It's funny because Ironhide is one of those characters that never got a whole lot of companies sort of throwing their hat in the ring regarding a Masterpiece offering. These were Masterpiece scaled, but they were super stylized, kind of staying true to the TFC approach and aesthetic cues. Don't think I ever messed with these, but they weren't super highly regarded as memory serves. Speaking of things not being highly regarded, was their Hades set, their Lyokaiser, which to this day is probably the worst combiner I've ever looked at from a polished third-party company to date. It was awful. The bots were cool enough, and some of the transformations were kind of fun and enjoyable and intuitive for them as well. But the combine mode specifically was a mess. And for years, I kept him sort of propped up between his spear and the side of a bookcase was the only way I could keep him balanced. And I finally eventually let him go. But they were one of the few companies that's ever tackled this character and got a lot of fanfare for it. This whole set ended up getting clearanced out within a year, I think, of its release. And I remember still getting DMs like, is it really that bad? Because it's on sale. And I remember saying, why do you think it's on sale? But it doesn't matter. One of my most historic reviews in my catalog was the TFC Hound. It was a nightmare to transform, and it was not made of stern stuff, and as a result, it broke. I ended up driving it over with my car. That was after hitting it with a shovel and a couple other things. The remains of it now sit in my Junkion diorama on my Masterpiece shelf. It's a good review if you haven't seen it. It's fun, but the figure was anything but fun. It was awful, atrocious, a nightmare, and I think put a nail in their coffin for a lot of Masterpiece-styled approaches. But just then, other styles that they've approached in the past return with their kind of mini Hercules, which was a cool little throwback to Hercules itself and also their Chibi Optimus Prime. An interesting set, but nothing that got a whole lot of steam or fanfare. But they continued with their sort of obscure combiners, which was their Road Caesar. Now, I bought the yellow guy, and I ended up selling him to Jimmy Friday, if memory serves. But this was a turning point for me. This is also 2017, the height, in my opinion, of the golden era of third-party Masterpiece. But this is when it occurred to me that I need to stop buying characters of which I know nothing about and don't care anything for. I don't know who Road Caesar is. I had never heard of him before I got back into Transformers Transformers at a ripe age of 34. And here I am spending almost $300 on a set that I know nothing about, and as a result, am not appreciating. I think he was actually fairly well received, though, if memory serves. And the combined mode scratched a lot of itches for a lot of people. I just didn't know who it was. And I think had I even seen the combined mode at that point in my fandom, I would have not been able to tell you the name of the character. And that's when I had to kind of have a come to God moment of, why am I buying things? Am I buying things just to buy them, or am I buying things to curate a collection of things that I've loved throughout my life? And when I realized it was the latter, pretty much got out of TFC. With one exception, their Seacons, which is probably the best combiner set that they've ever done to date. The designs were cool, stylized for sure, but they integrated well into the combined mode. The combined mode was fairly stable, and the combined mode was able, if memory serves, to pull off the gimmick of all 5 limb bots integrating as an arm, integrating as a leg, or integrating as a weapon. It was an impressive set. It was an ambitious set. It was a stable set, more importantly, and to this day is probably the best combiner that they've ever done, and might be the best thing they've ever done. But many would argue it was their following release, which was their Sergeant Commander G.I. Joe styled Optimus Prime. And this continues the trend of them kind of being unpredictable and doing whatever sort of tickles their fancy at the moment. This was a cool set, worked well. It's just a little too left field for my taste, but a lot of people really liked it, and for good reason. Good materials, good build, good gimmicks, interesting aesthetics. And then, as you guys know, we just recently here on the channel ended up looking at the second release in that line, which was their Megatron or Tyrant, which is supposed to kind of be in the same aesthetic. And then the last thing that we're going to talk about in regard to that stuff is they did a weird, odd color of it too. And I've been kind of not mentioning a lot of repaints here, but this thing was just so bizarre that I wanted to include it. But they have a hard time letting go of their combiners, and they revealed Satan. Not the real Satan, mind you, but their take on Abominus, which to date, they haven't really fully revealed, in my opinion, and have only released 4 out of 5 of their figures. And keep in mind, this started back in 2019. And here we are in 2022. But it hasn't stopped them from putting out figures. They just haven't been a lot of Terracons in those releases. They released Lumitant, an original design that transformed into a jet that I think looks cool. And the jet mode gives me a little bit of nostalgic MP11 vibes, just in the way it looks, but I have no interest in or basis of knowledge of. And they released another original design, which was their Egocopter. Once again, same sort of deal. Cool look, interesting aesthetic. I love the helicopter mode, but just without a point of reference for me, it doesn't do much for me. Now, they did continue, but it just seems like a company that started in 2008, moving into 2022, in the final kind of twilight, it seems, of their relevance to jump into their own personal design seems like a bizarre choice, but you know what? It's theirs to make. So, what do I think about the future of TFC? I really don't know. I'm going to play it 2 different ways. On one hand, I think it would be really cool if they came back with combiners in a very modern way, being as though they were kind of like at the forefront, the tip of the spear, if you will, with combiners when sort of third-party combiners were first getting started. If they relaunched, look, man, we're back. We're going to compete in this modern space. We're going to scale with the modern space. We're going to have the stability and the kind of engineering and technology that the modern folks are using, and we're coming back for our spot. I think that would be cool. Whether or not it would be for me is anybody's guess, but just to see them kind of return. It's like MMC, right? MMC doing all of the kind of all-in-one combiners. I think I speak for a lot of people. We'd love to see them come back and do an updated Pharaoh Rex, but in that Ox Deco and with that sort of technology. So I think it would be cool to see TFC kind of come back and sort of make a run at reclaiming their kind of title there. I think that would be cool. I like the story of an underdog. Now, if they do not go that way, I, for one, want them to obviously finish their Abominus that they're 4 figures in on, because people have been buying it and committing to it, so you got to finish it for them. And I'll be honest, I wouldn't be mad to see them just finish Computron as well, and probably a Bruticus. Just to say that, look, man, one kind of company pretty much did all of them. I guess Dino King as well. But if you know what I mean, for the most part, did all of them. But I know that that's a lot to ask, especially at this point in their career. So if they weren't going to try to kind of catch up with the times, because that's what has happened to them, right? That's the lesson of this story, is that a company like them that's been around for so long didn't have the sort of growth. And I don't mean that in terms of finances. I don't mean that in terms of popularity. I mean growth in terms of staying competitive in the market space. It didn't have the same growth that their kind of contemporaries had. And as a result, they got left in the dust, where they used to be at the tip of the spear, as we said. And it's really really a lesson to be learned from it, right? Like, just because you're a top dog at one point, if you don't stay up with the times, you're gonna get left behind. And that's what happened to them. Is the Seacons and the Protectopods better than Hercules and Uranus? Yes, absolutely. Is it 10 years better? Not really. By the time they got to the Seacons, I mean, there was other competitors out there with third-party offerings of combiners that had blown their doors off. So they just didn't have the weight anymore in that space. So if they're not going to make a effort to get back in and sort of catch up, especially if they have the tools at their disposal that the rumors suggest they might, then my advice is probably to just stay in the lane they're doing now. Do random stuff, do little obscure stuff, and just ride it out. If you don't want to be a big player anymore, just ride it out and stay out of the way. It's kind of what it comes down to here. Either fight to get back in the game or do your one-offs and stay out of the way. As I know, it's not necessarily the most optimistic or positive thing to end on, but it is kind of how I feel about it. So with that being said, we got a whole bunch of reviews this week. We got 4 reviews this week, and then I'm taking Friday off, and I'll be back Saturday. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Until next time, take care.